Get up. You don't belong here.
Mosh, niente puitu nan.
Those were the exact words a flight attendant spit at a 17-year-old black girl sitting in her paid first-class seat. She grabbed the teenager by the arm and dragged her down the aisle, while an entire plane full of grown adults watched and did nothing. But what this flight attendant didn't know, what nobody on that plane could have possibly known, was that this girl's father owned more jets than this airline had gates. And when he found out what happened to his daughter, he did something no one in aviation history had ever seen before. He shut the whole airport down. If you want to hear how this satisfying story ends, subscribe to my channel right now. Follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Maya Johnson had not slept in 31 hours. That fact sat heavy behind her eyes like wet sand as she walked through Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, her rolling carry-on clicking against the polished floor with every step. She had spent the last 2 days buried in final exams at Columbia, running on vending machine coffee and sheer determination, and the only thing standing between her and a few hours of peace was a 5-hour flight to Los Angeles. She had her boarding pass on her phone. Seat 3A. First class. Her father had booked it himself because Robert Johnson did not believe his only daughter should fly coach when she was traveling alone. Maya had argued with him about it the way she always argued with him about money. She didn't want people to think she was some spoiled rich kid. She wanted to earn things on her own terms. But Robert had said, "Baby girl, you can earn the whole world on Monday. On Friday night, you fly safe and you fly comfortable. That's not negotiable." So she had the ticket. She had every right to be there. And she had no idea that the next 20 minutes of her life would change everything. The check-in area for first class was quieter than the rest of the terminal. Maya noticed that immediately. The lighting was softer. The carpet was thicker. There were only a handful of people standing in line, and every single one of them looked like they had stepped out of a business magazine. Tailored suits, leather briefcases, gray hair and gold watches. And then there was Maya. 17 years old, 5'6", wearing a Columbia hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, leggings, and a pair of white sneakers that had seen better days. Her braids were pulled back in a messy bun, and she had her AirPods in listening to a playlist her roommate had made for her. She didn't think twice about how she looked. Why would she? She was a college student going home. The gate agent barely glanced at her when she scanned her boarding pass. The beep was green. The screen confirmed it. Seat 3A. First class. Maya walked down the jet bridge with her bag rolling behind her, feeling the exhaustion settle deeper into her bones with every step. All she wanted was to sit down, close her eyes, and wake up in California. She stepped onto the plane and turned left toward the first-class cabin. That's when she saw her. Patricia Waverly was standing at the entrance to first class with a smile that looked like it had been painted on with a roller. She was tall, blonde, mid-50s, with the kind of posture that suggested she had spent her entire career believing she was in charge of every room she walked into. Her uniform was pressed so sharp it could cut paper, and her name tag gleamed under the overhead light like a badge of authority. Patricia's eyes landed on Maya, and something shifted. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But Maya had spent her whole life being the only black girl in rooms full of people who looked like Patricia Waverly. She knew that look. The quick scan from head to toe. The slight tightening around the mouth. The way the smile didn't quite reach the eyes anymore. "Can I help you, sweetie?" Patricia said. And the word sweetie landed like a coin dropped on a counter. Dismissive. Flat. Maya pulled out one of her AirPods. "I'm sorry. I said, can I help you? Economy boarding hasn't started yet. You'll need to wait back in the terminal." Maya blinked. "I'm not flying economy. I'm in 3A. Patricia tilted her head the way people do when they think you've made a mistake, but they're too polite to say it directly. 3A is in our first-class cabin on. Are you sure you have the right boarding pass?" "I'm sure." Maya held up her phone, the boarding pass bright and clear on the screen. Maya Johnson, seat 3A. Patricia looked at the phone. Then she looked at Maya. Then she looked at the phone again, as if the information might rearrange itself if she stared long enough. "One moment," Patricia said. She didn't take the phone. She didn't scan anything. She just turned and walked up the aisle toward the front galley where another flight attendant was organizing a beverage cart. Maya stood there still holding her phone up, feeling something cold start to form in her stomach. She lowered her hand and stepped into the first-class cabin. The seats were wide and leather separated by polished wood armrests. A man in a charcoal suit was already settled into 2C reading a newspaper. A woman across the aisle was adjusting a silk sleep mask on her forehead. Nobody looked at Maya. She found 3A window seat. She lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin, sat down, and buckled her seatbelt. The leather was cool against her legs, and for a moment, just one brief moment, she felt relief. Then she heard the footsteps. Patricia was coming back up the aisle, and she was not alone. Behind her was another flight attendant, younger, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled into a tight bun, and a face that looked like it was trying very hard to appear neutral. Her name tag read, Tiffany Miller. Patricia stopped right next to row 3. She didn't crouch down. She didn't lower her voice. She stood at full height and spoke loud enough for every person in the first-class cabin to hear. "Miss, I'm going to need you to come with me." Maya looked up. "Excuse me. There seems to be an issue with your seating assignment. I'm going to need you to step out of this seat and come with me to the back of the plane." "An issue with my seat?" Maya's voice cracked slightly, not from fear, but from disbelief. "I showed you my boarding pass. 3A, first class. What issue could there possibly be?" Patricia's painted smile didn't waver. "We're conducting a routine verification. It's standard procedure. I'm sure you understand." "Standard procedure for who?" Maya said. She looked around the cabin. The man in 2C had lowered his newspaper. The woman with the sleep mask was watching openly now. "Did you ask anyone else to verify their seat?" Patricia's jaw tightened. "Just barely. Just enough. Miss, I need you to lower your voice and come with me. You're making other passengers uncomfortable." "I'm making them uncomfortable. I'm sitting in my seat. I haven't done anything. If you could just cooperate, this will only take a moment." Maya felt her hands start to tremble. Not from weakness. From the effort of holding everything inside. She had been taught how to handle this. Her father had sat her down when she was 12 years old and told her that there would be moments in her life when people would look at her and see something they had already decided about before she ever opened her mouth. He told her to stay calm, to speak clearly, to never let anyone steal her dignity. But knowing what to do and actually doing it, when a grown woman is standing over you in front of a plane full of strangers, are two very different things. "I'm not moving," Maya said quietly. "This is my seat. I paid for it. Well, my father paid for it, but it's mine, and I'm not moving." Patricia's nostrils flared. She glanced at Tiffany, and something passed between them. A look. An understanding. The kind of silent communication that happens between people who have already decided what they're going to do. Tiffany stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you refuse to comply with crew instructions, we'll have no choice but to involve security." "Security?" Maya's voice rose. She couldn't help it. "For what?" "For sitting in my own seat. For being disruptive." "I am not being disruptive. You came to me. You are the ones causing a disruption." An older gentleman in row 1 turned around in his seat. He had silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and he looked like the kind of man who had spent 40 years in boardrooms. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing the question at Patricia. "No, sir," Patricia said smoothly. "Just a minor seating mix-up. We're handling it." The man looked at Maya, then he looked at Patricia. Then he turned back around and said nothing. Maya felt that silence like a punch. Nobody was going to help her. She was 17 years old, sitting in a seat she had every right to occupy, and not a single person in this cabin was going to say a word. "I want to speak to the captain," Maya said. "The captain is busy preparing for departure," Patricia replied. "Then I want to speak to your supervisor." "I am the senior flight attendant on this aircraft. I am the supervisor." Maya's throat was getting tight. She could feel the tears building, and she hated herself for it. She didn't want to cry. Crying meant they won. Crying meant they could look at her and see a child who didn't belong, instead of a person who had been wronged. "Can I at least see what your system says?" Maya asked. "Pull up my reservation. My name is Maya Johnson. The booking was made under Robert Johnson. Seat 3A, first class. It was booked 3 weeks ago." Patricia didn't move. "You won't even check," Maya whispered. "Miss, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know a first-class passenger when I see one." And there it was, the quiet part out loud. Maya stared at Patricia and Patricia stared back, and for a long moment neither of them blinked. The cabin was silent. The kind of silence that hums. The kind of silence that has weight. Then Tiffany reached down and put her hand on Maya's arm. "Let's go," Tiffany said. Not harsh, not gentle, just flat. Like she was moving a piece of luggage. Maya pulled her arm away. "Don't touch me." "Miss, you need to come with us now." "I said don't touch me." Tiffany grabbed her arm again harder this time and pulled. Maya's seatbelt was still buckled, and the force of the pull jerked her sideways. The buckle dug into her hip. She gasped, and the sound cut through the cabin like a knife. "Get your hands off of me!" Maya shouted. But Tiffany didn't let go. She reached across with her other hand and unclicked the seatbelt, and then she was pulling Maya up and out of the seat. Maya's hoodie twisted, her phone fell from her lap and hit the floor. Her carry-on shifted in the overhead bin above. "Stop it! You can't do this!" Patricia stepped back to clear the aisle, and Tiffany walked Maya forward. One hand on her arm, one hand on her back, guiding her like a prisoner down the center of the plane. Passengers in business class turned to watch. A mother covered her young son's eyes. A teenage boy held up his phone and started recording. Maya's tears came then. She couldn't stop them. They ran hot and fast down her cheeks, and she bit her lip so hard, she tasted copper. She was being paraded through the aircraft like a criminal. She was 17 years old and alone, and she was being dragged through a plane full of people who would not lift a finger. "Please," she said, and she hated the smallness of her own voice. "Please just check my ticket. We'll sort it out once you're seated in the appropriate section," Patricia called from behind them. The appropriate section. Maya's knees almost buckled. They pushed her through the curtain that separated business from economy, and the world changed. The seats got smaller, the air got warmer, the noise got louder. Tiffany guided her to a middle seat in row 37, between a large man with headphones and a woman eating peanuts from a Ziploc bag. "Have a seat," Tiffany said. Maya looked at the middle seat. She looked at Tiffany, and something inside her, something her father had built brick by brick over 17 years of love and truth and preparation, that something cracked. She sat down, but she didn't stop. Her hands were shaking so badly, she could barely hold her phone, which she had somehow managed to grab off the floor of the first-class cabin. She pulled up her contacts and pressed the name at the top. Dad. It rang once. Twice. "Hey, baby girl, you at the gate?" Maya opened her mouth, but what came out was not words. It was a sound. A raw, broken sound that no parent ever wants to hear from their child. Robert Johnson's voice changed instantly. The warmth drained out of it and was replaced by something hard, something focused, something that had built a $3 billion empire from nothing and had never once backed down from a fight. "Maya, talk to me. What happened?" "Daddy." She was sobbing now, trying to keep her voice down, but the passengers around her were already staring. "They took me out of my seat. The flight attendant. She said I didn't belong in first class. She grabbed me and dragged me to the back of the plane. Daddy, she grabbed me." Robert was silent for exactly 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, something monumental happened inside the mind of a man who had spent his entire life being underestimated, dismissed, and disrespected only to rise higher every single time. "Which airline?" he said. "Horizon Air, Flight 247. "Which airport?" "JFK Terminal 4. "Are you safe right now? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt. I'm just—" Her voice broke again. "I'm in a middle seat in economy, Dad. They just took me, like I was nothing." Robert's breathing was steady, controlled. The way it always was when he was making a decision that other people would feel for a very long time. "Maya, listen to me. I want you to stay exactly where you are. Don't move. Don't talk to any crew member. Don't sign anything. Don't apologize for anything. Do you hear me?" "Yes? I'm going to fix this." "Dad, what are you going to do?" Robert Johnson stood up from the leather chair in his home office in Bel Air. He walked to the window that overlooked the runway of his private airfield, where 3 Gulfstream jets sat waiting like sleeping lions. Something they'll remember. He hung up the phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his chief of operations, Gerald Turner, a man who had worked for Robert for 14 years and had learned long ago that when Robert spoke in short sentences, the world was about to shift. "Gerald, I need the G700 fueled and on the tarmac at Teterboro in 40 minutes. File an IFR flight plan to JFK. Runway 4 left." Gerald paused. "JFK, Robert, we don't land at JFK. We don't have clearance for commercial runway access." "We do now. Call Senator Whitfield's office. Tell him I'm calling in the favor from the infrastructure bill. I need priority landing clearance at JFK, and I need it in 30 minutes. "Robert, what's happening?" "My daughter is sitting in the back of a Horizon airplane because a flight attendant decided she didn't look rich enough to sit in first class. I want that plane grounded. I want it sitting on that tarmac until I get there personally." Gerald's response came without hesitation. "I'll make the calls." The second call Robert made was to his attorney Diane Okafor, a woman who had argued cases before the Supreme Court, and who kept Robert's number at the top of her speed dial for moments exactly like this one. "Diane, I need you to listen very carefully." "I'm listening." "My daughter was physically removed from her first-class seat on a Horizon Air flight because of the color of her skin. There is video. I guarantee you there is video because that plane was full of people with phones. I want a federal civil rights complaint filed within the hour. I want Horizon Air's legal team on the phone before that plane leaves the ground. And I want every major news outlet in this country to have this story by morning." Diane was already typing. "I'll have the complaint drafted in 20 minutes. Robert, are you planning to do something dramatic?" "I'm planning to do something necessary." "Those are usually the same thing with you." Robert almost smiled. "Almost. Just make the calls, Diane." He hung up and walked out of his office down the hallway, lined with photos of Maya at every age. Maya as a baby, Maya at her first piano recital. Maya graduating from high school a year early. Maya standing in front of the Columbia University gates with a grin that could power a city. His daughter, his whole world. And someone had put their hands on her. Back on the plane, Maya sat in her middle seat with her arms wrapped around herself, trying to become as small as possible. The man next to her with the headphones glanced over, once saw her tears and looked away. The woman with the peanuts pretended to be asleep. Maya stared at the seat back in front of her and tried to breathe. She thought about what her mother would have said. Angela Johnson had died when Maya was 9, breast cancer, and Maya carried her memory like a locket she never took off. Angela had been a civil rights attorney. She had been fierce and gentle in equal measure, and she had told Maya once when Maya came home crying because a girl at school said her hair was weird. She had said, "Baby, the people who try to make you small are the ones who are afraid of how big you are." Maya closed her eyes and repeated those words in her head until her breathing slowed. She didn't know what her father was doing. She didn't know about the phone calls, the jet being fueled, the senator being contacted, the attorney drafting legal complaints. She didn't know that in approximately 35 minutes, the most powerful private jet in the northeastern United States would be taxiing onto the same runway her plane was preparing to use, and that the entire departure schedule at JFK would grind to a halt. All she knew was that her father had said he would fix it, and Robert Johnson had never once in her life broken a promise. Up in the first-class cabin, Patricia Waverly was pouring champagne. She filled a glass for the man in 2C who took it without looking up from his newspaper. She filled another for the woman with the sleep mask, who smiled and said thank you. She moved through the cabin with the ease of someone who believed she had done the right thing. Tiffany Miller stood in the galley staring at her hands. She had not spoken since they put Maya in economy. Her face was pale, and there was a slight tremor in her fingers that she couldn't quite control. "You okay?" asked James, the third member of the flight crew, a young man with kind eyes who had watched the entire scene from the rear galley and had said nothing because Patricia outranked him, and he had only been with the airline for 8 months. "I'm fine," Tiffany said. But she wasn't fine. She kept seeing the girl's face, the tears, the way she had said please, the way her hoodie had twisted when Tiffany grabbed her arm. "Should we have checked her ticket?" James asked quietly. Tiffany looked at him. Patricia said she didn't match the passenger profile. "What does that mean?" Tiffany didn't answer because she knew exactly what it meant, and the knowing sat in her chest like a stone. James looked toward the cockpit. "The captain doesn't know, does he?" Patricia said she'd handle it. "Handle it how?" "I don't know, James. I don't know." In the cockpit, Captain David Hernandez was running through his pre-flight checklist with his first officer, Linda Park. They were 15 minutes from pushback, and everything was on schedule. Captain Hernandez had been flying for 28 years. He had seen mechanical failures, medical emergencies, passenger fights, bomb threats, and one unfortunate incident involving a live chicken in an overhead bin. He had handled all of it with steady hands and a calm voice. He had no idea that the biggest crisis of his career was about to land on his runway. His radio crackled. "Horizon 247, this is JFK ground control. Hold your position. Do not push back. Repeat, do not push back." Captain Hernandez frowned. "JFK ground Horizon 247, requesting reason for hold." There was a pause. The kind of pause that makes experienced pilots sit up straighter. "Horizon 247, we have an inbound priority aircraft requesting immediate access to runway 4 left. All departures are suspended until further notice." Linda looked at the captain. "Priority aircraft. What priority aircraft?" Captain Hernandez keyed his radio. "Ground. Can you identify the inbound aircraft?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Horizon 247. The inbound aircraft is a Gulfstream G700 registration November, Romeo Juliet 1. The aircraft has been granted emergency priority clearance by order of the FAA Regional Director." Linda's eyes went wide. Emergency priority for a private jet that doesn't happen. Captain Hernandez stared at his instruments. In 28 years of flying, he had never heard of a private aircraft being granted emergency priority clearance to a commercial runway at JFK without a declared in-flight emergency. Something was very, very wrong. Or something was very, very right. Depending on which seat you were sitting in, the Gulfstream G700 descended through the clouds over Long Island like a silver arrow. Inside, Robert Johnson sat alone in the main cabin. He was wearing a charcoal suit that he had put on in 4 minutes flat because Robert Johnson did everything with speed and precision. His phone was in his hand, and he was reading a text from Diane. Federal complaint filed. Horizon Air Legal Department notified. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox have all been tipped. The story breaks in 1 hour. Robert typed back 2 words. Not enough. He looked out the window as the lights of JFK appeared below him, sprawling and bright against the darkness. Somewhere down there, his daughter was sitting in a middle seat in economy class crying because a woman with a name tag and a pressed uniform had decided that a black teenager in a hoodie couldn't possibly belong in first class. Robert's jaw tightened. He had built his empire for moments like this. Not for the money, not for the jets, not for the houses or the magazine covers, or the invitations to the White House. For this. For the ability to stand in front of the world and say, not my daughter. Not today. Not ever again. The Gulfstream touched down on runway 4 left at 9:47 p.m. And it did not move. It sat there gleaming and enormous, blocking the primary departure runway at one of the busiest airports on Earth. Behind it, Horizon Air Flight 247 sat motionless at its gate. Behind that, 14 other aircraft waited in a growing line that stretched back toward the taxiways. In the control tower, phones started ringing. In the Horizon Air Operations Center, alarms started sounding. And in seat 37B of Flight 247. Maya Johnson felt her phone buzz with a text from her father. Look out the window, baby girl. Maya leaned across the woman with the peanuts, who was now very much awake, and pressed her face against the cold glass of the airplane window. There on the runway, lit up by the blue taxiway lights like a monument, sat her father's jet. And painted on the tail in letters she had known her whole life were the initials R.J. Maya's breath caught in her throat. He came. He actually came, and he brought the whole airport to its knees. Maya pressed her face harder against the window, her breath fogging the cold glass, and for a moment she thought she was dreaming. The Gulfstream sat on the runway like a wall of polished steel, its navigation lights blinking slowly in the darkness, and it was not moving. It had no intention of moving. The letters R.J. on the tail fin were lit up by the ground lights, and Maya's heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The woman next to her with the peanuts leaned over. What is that? Why aren't we moving? Maya didn't answer. She couldn't. Her throat was closed and her eyes were burning. But these were different tears now. These weren't the tears of a girl who had been humiliated. These were the tears of a daughter who understood in a way she never fully had before, exactly what her father was willing to do for her. Her phone buzzed again. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. I'm coming to you. Coming to her. He was coming to her. On a plane that was blocking an active runway at one of the busiest airports in the world. Maya let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and the man with the headphones next to her finally pulled them off and said, Hey, are you okay? I'm fine, Maya whispered. My dad's here. Your dad where? Maya pointed out the window at the Gulfstream. The man stared. Then he stared at Maya. Then he stared back at the jet. That's your father's plane, Maya nodded. The man slowly put his headphones back on, but he didn't press play. He just sat there with his mouth slightly open, processing what he had just learned about the crying teenager in the hoodie who had been shoved into the middle seat next to him 20 minutes ago. Up in the cockpit, Captain David Hernandez was on his third call with ground control, and his voice had climbed 2 octaves higher than his normal operating register. Ground, I need clarification. You're telling me a private aircraft has parked on my departure runway and you cannot move it. Horizon 247. That is correct. The aircraft has been granted priority clearance by FAA Regional Authority. We are in contact with the pilot, but the aircraft has declared a non-emergency hold. A non-emergency hold. That's not a real designation. That doesn't exist. Captain, we are aware. We are working the situation. Maintain position and stand by. Captain Hernandez ripped off his headset and turned to Linda Park. Get me the operations manager on the satellite phone, now. Linda was already dialing. Her hands were steady, but her eyes told a different story. David, I've never seen anything like this. Not once. Neither have I. And I've been doing this since before you were born. The satellite phone connected, and the voice on the other end belonged to Victor Marsh, Horizon Air's JFK station manager, a man who had spent his entire evening dealing with a delayed baggage carousel and was not prepared for what was about to happen to his career. "Victor, this is Captain Hernandez, on Flight 247. We are being held at the gate by a private aircraft blocking runway 4 left. I need to know what is going on, and I need to know right now." Victor's voice was strained. "Captain, I just got off the phone with corporate. The situation is, well, it's complicated." "Uncomplicated. The jet on the runway belongs to Robert Johnson." Silence. "Robert Johnson," Captain Hernandez repeated. "The Robert Johnson Enterprises. That's the one. Apparently his daughter is on your aircraft and there's been some kind of incident involving the cabin crew." Captain Hernandez closed his eyes. When he opened them, his face had changed. The confusion was gone. In its place was something cold and precise, the face of a man who understood that he was standing at the center of something much bigger than a delayed departure. "What kind of incident, Victor?" "I don't have all the details yet. What I know is that Johnson's legal team has already filed a federal civil rights complaint, and CNN has a crew heading to the airport right now. Corporate is in full crisis mode. They want you to sit tight and not let anyone off the plane until they figure out a response." "Not let anyone off the plane, Victor. I have 187 passengers on this aircraft. Some of them have connections. Some of them have children. You're telling me to hold them hostage because your airline can't figure out how to manage a PR crisis?" "I'm telling you what corporate told me, David." "Then tell corporate I want to speak to them directly. And while you're at it, find out exactly what happened to Robert Johnson's daughter on my airplane. Because whatever it was bad enough for a billionaire to shut down JFK." He hung up the phone and sat in silence for 10 seconds. Then he unbuckled his harness and stood up. "Where are you going?" Linda asked. "To find out what my crew did." Captain Hernandez opened the cockpit door and stepped into the first-class cabin. Patricia Waverly was standing near the galley with a fresh glass of sparkling water in her hand, and when she saw the captain walking toward her, something in her expression flickered. Just for a second. Just enough. "Patricia, my office, now." He said it loud enough for the passengers in the first 2 rows to hear, and he didn't care. He walked back into the cockpit and held the door open. Patricia set down her glass, smoothed her uniform, and followed him in. Linda Park looked up from her seat, but didn't speak. She knew that tone. Everyone who had ever worked with David Hernandez knew that tone. "Close the door," the captain said. Patricia closed it. "Tell me what happened with the girl." Patricia's composure held, but barely. "Captain, there was a passenger who appeared to be in the wrong seat. I followed standard protocol and relocated her to the correct cabin." "What do you mean, appeared to be in the wrong seat?" "She didn't match the profile of a first-class passenger. She was young. She was wearing casual clothes. She didn't have any identification readily visible." "Did you check her boarding pass?" Patricia hesitated. It was a small hesitation, a fraction of a second. But in that fraction, Captain Hernandez saw everything he needed to see. "Did you check her boarding pass, Patricia?" "She showed me something on her phone, but I couldn't verify it in the system." "Couldn't or didn't?" "Captain, I made a judgment call based on my experience." "Your experience?" Captain Hernandez's voice was flat. 22 years of experience, and your judgment told you to remove a passenger from a seat she was assigned to without checking the reservation system." "I was trying to protect the integrity of the first-class cabin." "Protect it from what?" "From a 17-year-old girl." Patricia's chin lifted. "From someone who clearly did not belong there." The words hung in the cockpit like smoke. Linda Park turned away and stared out the windshield. Captain Hernandez stood perfectly still, and when he spoke again his voice was so quiet that Patricia had to lean forward to hear it. "That girl you removed from first class is the daughter of Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson, the man who owns Johnson Enterprises, the man who just parked his personal Gulfstream G700 on our departure runway, the man whose legal team has already filed a federal civil rights complaint against this airline. The man who is at this very moment shutting down every departure at JFK because you decided a black girl in a hoodie didn't look rich enough to sit in seat 3A. Every drop of color left Patricia's face. It happened so fast, it was almost medical. "That's not, I didn't know who she..." "You didn't need to know who she was, Patricia. That's the whole point. You didn't need to know who her father was to treat her like a human being. You needed to check her ticket. That's it. That's all you had to do. And you chose not to. And now this airline is going to pay for your choice, and I am going to spend the rest of my evening explaining to 187 passengers why they can't go home tonight." Patricia opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Get out of my cockpit," Captain Hernandez said. "Send Tiffany Miller in next." And Patricia, do not speak to another passenger for the rest of this flight. If this flight ever leaves the ground. Patricia left the cockpit on legs that barely held her. She walked through the first-class cabin without looking at anyone, and for the first time in 22 years, her hands were shaking. Tiffany Miller appeared in the cockpit doorway 30 seconds later. She was already crying. "Before you say anything," Captain Hernandez said, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened, from the beginning, every detail." Tiffany told him. She told him about Patricia flagging the girl. She told him about the confrontation at the seat. She told him about grabbing Maya's arm, unbuckling her seatbelt, pulling her out of the seat, walking her down the aisle. She told him all of it, and by the time she finished, her mascara had drawn 2 black rivers down her cheeks. "I knew it was wrong," Tiffany said. "I knew it the second I touched her. But Patricia told me to do it, and she's the senior crew member, and I thought if I didn't listen, I'd lose my job." "You might lose it anyway," Captain Hernandez said. "Not cruel, just honest." Tiffany nodded. "I know." "Was there anyone else involved, James?" "James didn't do anything. He was in the back. He didn't know until it was already happening." Captain Hernandez looked at Linda. Linda looked back at him. A conversation happened without words, the way it does between people who have worked together for years and who both understand that they are standing on the edge of something that cannot be undone. "Tiffany, go back to the galley and stay there. Don't talk to Patricia. Don't talk to passengers. I'm going to handle this." Tiffany left, and Captain Hernandez sat back down in his seat and pressed his palms against his eyes. "What are you going to do?" Linda asked. "I'm going to do the only thing that makes sense. I'm going to go talk to the girl." "David." I know what corporate said. I don't care. There's a 17-year-old kid sitting in economy class right now who was physically dragged out of her seat by my crew on my airplane on my watch. I'm going to look her in the eye and I'm going to apologize. Corporate will lose their minds. Corporate should have thought about that before they hired people who drag children out of first class because of the color of their skin." He stood up, put on his captain's hat, and walked out of the cockpit. The first-class cabin went silent as he passed through. The man in 2C finally put down his newspaper and watched the captain walk by with a look that said he was beginning to understand exactly what kind of story he was sitting in the middle of. Captain Hernandez pushed through the curtain into business class, then through the next curtain into economy. He walked down the center aisle and passengers turned to look at him because it was unusual. Deeply unusual for the captain to be walking through the back of the plane before takeoff. He found Maya in 37B. She was curled against the man with the headphones. Not because she knew him, but because there was nowhere else to go. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her hoodie was still twisted from where Tiffany had grabbed her. And when she looked up and saw the captain standing in the aisle, she flinched. She flinched, and Captain David Hernandez felt something break inside his chest. "Maya Johnson," he said softly. Maya nodded. She didn't trust her voice. Captain Hernandez did something that no one in economy class expected. He crouched down in the aisle so that he was at her eye level, the way you would with a scared child, and he took off his hat. "My name is Captain David Hernandez. I am the pilot in command of this aircraft, and I want you to know that what happened to you tonight should never have happened. It was wrong. It was inexcusable, and I am sorry." Maya stared at him. Tears rolled down her face, but she didn't make a sound. "Your seat is 3A in first class. That is where you belong. I have verified your reservation personally, and I would like to escort you back to your seat right now, if you'll let me." Maya's lower lip trembled. "They said I didn't belong there. They were wrong, dead wrong, and they will be held accountable. The one who grabbed me. She pulled me out of my seat like I was nothing, like I was garbage. I know, and I promise you that will never happen on one of my flights again." The man with the headphones spoke up. He pulled them all the way off and looked at the captain with an expression that had shifted from indifference to something hard and angry. "Captain, I watched them bring this girl back here. She was crying and begging them to check her ticket. Nobody listened. Nobody helped her. I sat right here and I didn't say a word, and I'm ashamed of that." A woman 3 rows up turned around. "I saw it too. I thought about saying something, but I didn't want to get involved. That's on me." Another voice from across the aisle. A man in a business suit with gray at his temples. "Same here. I saw the whole thing and I told myself it wasn't my problem. But it is my problem. It's all of our problem." Maya looked at these strangers, who were suddenly finding their courage, and she felt something shift inside her. The humiliation was still there. The anger was still there. But underneath it, something new was forming. Something that felt like strength. Captain Hernandez stood up and extended his hand to Maya. "Come on. Let me take you home. Your real home. Seat 3A. Maya took his hand and stood. Her legs were unsteady, and she gripped his fingers harder than she meant to. But he didn't let go. He walked her up the aisle through economy, through business class, through the curtain into first class, and every passenger they passed watched in silence. Patricia Waverly was standing in the galley. When she saw Maya walking toward first class with the captain, her face went through 4 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, confusion, fear, and then something else. Something that looked almost like recognition, as if she was seeing for the first time exactly what she had done. Captain Hernandez walked Maya to seat 3A. Her carry-on was still in the overhead bin. Her blanket was still folded on the seat. Nothing had been touched. "This is your seat," Captain Hernandez said, "and nobody is going to take it from you again." Maya sat down. She buckled her seatbelt. She pulled the blanket across her lap, and then she looked up at the captain and said something that he would remember for the rest of his life. "Thank you, but this isn't over. My father is on that runway, and he doesn't stop until things change." Captain Hernandez nodded slowly. "I know, and between you and me, I hope he doesn't." He walked back to the cockpit, closed the door, and picked up the radio. "JFK ground, this is Horizon 247. Go ahead, 247. We have a situation on board that requires resolution before we can discuss departure. Please advise the inbound aircraft on runway 4 left that we acknowledge their position and we are cooperating fully." "Copy that, 247. Be advised we now have 17 aircraft holding for departure, and the FAA has been notified at the federal level. Port Authority police are en route to your gate. CNN has a satellite truck pulling into the terminal parking lot. This is escalating, Captain." "I'm aware. Do you need assistance?" Captain Hernandez looked through his windshield at the Gulfstream sitting on the runway, its lights still blinking, still not moving, still blocking every plane at JFK, like a monument to a father's rage. "No," he said. "What I need is for everyone to understand that this is not going away until it's made right." He clicked off the radio and sat in the silence of his cockpit while the biggest airport in New York held its breath. Outside the terminal, 3 things were happening simultaneously. A black SUV with government plates was pulling up to the Horizon Air Executive Office. A CNN satellite truck was extending its antenna in the passenger pickup zone. And Robert Johnson was stepping off his Gulfstream onto the tarmac in a charcoal suit and Italian shoes, flanked by 2 attorneys and his chief of operations, walking toward Terminal 4 with the unhurried stride of a man who had all the time in the world because he owned the clock. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. It was the CEO of Horizon Air calling personally. Robert stared at the name for 3 rings. Then he answered. "Mr. Johnson, this is Craig Bellamy, CEO of Horizon Air. I want to personally express." "Craig, I'm going to stop you right there. You have approximately 4 hours before this story airs on every major news network in this country. In those 4 hours, you can either be the airline that dragged a black teenager out of first class and then covered it up, or you can be the airline that dragged a black teenager out of first class and then did something about it. Those are your only 2 options. I'd choose carefully. Mr. Johnson, we want to cooperate fully. We're prepared to offer. I don't want your money, Craig. I have money. What I want is the name of every employee who touched my daughter, a full internal investigation launched tonight, not tomorrow tonight, and a commitment to structural reform that I will personally oversee. And if I don't have all 3 of those things by midnight, my attorneys will own this airline by Friday." Silence on the other end. The kind of silence that costs millions. "I'll have our legal team call your attorneys within the hour," Craig said. "You have 30 minutes, Robert said. "The clock started when your flight attendant grabbed my daughter's arm." He hung up and kept walking toward the terminal. Gerald fell into step beside him. "The Port Authority police want to talk to you about the runway situation," Gerald said. "Let them wait." "The FAA regional director is asking how long the jet will remain on the runway." "Until I say otherwise. Robert, they could arrest you." Robert stopped walking. He turned to Gerald, and in the harsh fluorescent light of the JFK tarmac, his face was carved from stone. "Gerald, my daughter called me from the back of an airplane sobbing because a woman decided she didn't deserve to sit in a seat I paid $12,000 for. They put their hands on my child. My child. So you tell the FAA and the Port Authority and anyone else who wants to have a conversation that I will move my jet when justice moves first, not 1 second before." Gerald nodded once and made the call. Inside the terminal, the Horizon Airgate area had transformed into something between a command center and a circus. Passengers from Flight 247, who had been receiving text updates from people still on the plane, were gathering near the windows, pressing their faces against the glass to see the Gulf Stream sitting on the runway. Airport security had set up a perimeter. 2 Port Authority officers were speaking into radios, and a young woman with a CNN press badge was interviewing a janitor who had heard the whole story from a gate agent who had heard it from a ramp worker who had seen the jet land. The story was spreading. Fast. Faster than Horizon Air's crisis team could contain it. Faster than their prepared statements could be drafted. Faster than their lawyers could review the liability. Because in the age of cell phones and social media, the truth doesn't wait for permission. And the truth was this. A 17-year-old black girl had been dragged out of her first-class seat on a Horizon Air flight, and her billionaire father had shut down JFK Airport to make the world pay attention. On the plane, Maya sat in her restored first-class seat and stared out the window at her father's jet. She pressed her hand against the glass as if she could reach across the tarmac and touch him. Her phone buzzed one more time. "I see your window, baby girl. Keep your light on. I'm coming." Maya turned on the overhead reading light and left her hand against the glass, and somewhere out on the dark tarmac, Robert Johnson saw a small light flicker on in a first-class window, and he knew his daughter could see him, and he walked faster. Robert Johnson walked through the terminal doors at 10:14 p.m., and the air around him changed. Security guards stepped aside without being asked. A Horizon Air gate supervisor, who had been standing near the entrance with a clipboard, dropped it when she recognized his face from the cover of Forbes. 2 Port Authority officers moved to intercept him, and Robert's attorney, Diane Okafor, stepped forward with a leather folder and said 3 words that stopped them in their tracks. "Federal civil rights." The officers looked at each other. Then they looked at Robert. Then they stepped back. Gerald was on the phone behind them, speaking rapidly to someone at the FAA. But Robert didn't slow down. He walked straight toward the Horizon Air Operations Office, and the crowd of passengers who had gathered near the windows parted like water. Some of them recognized him. A few pulled out their phones. One woman whispered to her husband, "That's the man who owns the jet on the runway." Robert didn't acknowledge any of them. His eyes were locked forward, and his stride never broke. 27 years in business had taught him that the most powerful thing a man could do in a crisis was move with absolute certainty, even when his heart was breaking. And his heart was breaking. Because every step he took toward that operations office was a step closer to the place where his daughter had been humiliated, and every second that passed was a second she had spent wondering if the world would ever see her as more than a color and a hoodie. He reached the operations office at 10:18 p.m. The door was locked. A young man in a Horizon Air vest was standing outside, looking like he wished he had called in sick today. "Open the door," Robert said. "Sir, I can't let unauthorized personnel into." Diane stepped forward again. "My client's minor daughter was physically assaulted by your airline's employees less than 1 hour ago. Under federal law, he has the right to file a complaint in person with the station manager. You can open this door, or I can have a federal marshal open it for you in approximately 12 minutes. Your choice." The young man opened the door. Inside, Victor Marsh was standing behind a desk covered in printouts holding a phone to each ear. When Robert walked in, Victor hung up both phones simultaneously, which would have been impressive under different circumstances. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Victor Marsh, the station manager. I want you to know that we are taking this situation extremely seriously." "Where is the footage?" Robert said. "I'm sorry. Your aircraft has security cameras in the cabin. I want the footage of what happened to my daughter. I want it now, not after your legal team has reviewed it, not after your crisis management firm has sanitized it. Now." Victor's face went pale. "Mr. Johnson, I don't have the authority to release internal security footage without corporate approval." "Then get corporate on the phone. They're already aware of the situation. Craig Bellamy himself is. I've already spoken to Craig. He had 30 minutes to respond, and 15 of those minutes are gone. So let me make this simple for you, Victor. Either you show me that footage in the next 5 minutes, or my legal team will subpoena it. And when they do, they'll also subpoena every internal communication, every training record, and every complaint ever filed against every member of your cabin crew. And then, this won't just be about one flight. It'll be about your entire airline." Victor Marsh had been in airline operations for 16 years. He had dealt with angry passengers, delayed flights, lost luggage, and one memorable incident involving a first-class passenger who insisted on bringing a live peacock on board. But he had never been in a room with a man who could buy his airline and shut it down by lunch, and who was staring at him with the quiet fury of a father whose child had been violated. Victor picked up his desk phone and dialed. "This is Marsh at JFK. I need the cabin footage from Flight 247 pulled immediately. All cameras from boarding to present. Send it to my terminal. Authorization code Victor Mike 77. He hung up and looked at Robert. It'll take a few minutes. I'll wait. Robert sat down in the only chair in front of Victor's desk. He didn't cross his legs. He didn't lean back. He sat forward with his hands clasped between his knees, and he waited with the patience of a man who understood that what was coming next would determine not just his daughter's future, but the future of an entire airline. Diane stood behind him, already typing on her phone. Gerald was outside the door, coordinating with Robert's communications team in Los Angeles. The machinery of accountability was spinning up, and it was spinning fast. At 10:23 p.m., Victor's computer chimed. The footage had arrived. "Play it," Robert said. Victor turned the monitor so Robert could see, and he pressed play. The video was in color high-definition shot from an overhead camera in the first-class cabin. Robert watched as Maya walked onto the plane, tired and small, in her oversized hoodie, her carry-on rolling behind her. He watched her find seat 3A. He watched her put her bag in the overhead bin. He watched her sit down and buckle her seatbelt. And then he watched Patricia Waverly walk up to his daughter and tell her to move. Robert's jaw tightened. He watched Maya hold up her phone, showing her boarding pass. He watched Patricia wave it away without looking. He watched the argument escalate, Maya's voice rising, her hands shaking, her eyes filling with tears, while she defended her right to sit in a seat she was assigned to. And then Tiffany Miller entered the frame. Robert's breathing stopped. He watched Tiffany grab Maya's arm. He watched his daughter pull away. He watched Tiffany grab her again harder and reach across to unbuckle her seatbelt. He watched his daughter's body jerk sideways. He watched her phone fall to the floor. He watched Tiffany pull Maya out of the seat and march her down the aisle. And he heard through the tinny speakers of Victor's computer his daughter's voice saying the word please. Robert closed his eyes. When he opened them, everything about him was different. The grief was gone. The restraint was gone. What remained was something that Victor Marsh recognized immediately, because he had seen it once before years ago, when a union negotiator had pushed too hard and the CEO at the time had walked into the room and ended 3 careers in 4 sentences. It was the look of a man who was done talking. "Diane," Robert said without turning around. "I'm here. Add assault to the complaint, physical assault of a minor. I want criminal charges recommended, not just civil, and I want this footage preserved as evidence under a litigation hold. If one frame of this video disappears, I will hold every person in this airline's chain of command personally liable." Already drafting it, Robert stood up and looked at Victor. "Where is my daughter right now?" "She's back in her first-class seat. Captain Hernandez escorted her personally." "The captain did that?" "Yes, sir. On his own authority." Something shifted in Robert's expression. Not much, just a fraction. A recognition that somewhere in this broken chain, one person had done the right thing. "I want to speak to the captain, and I want to see my daughter. You're going to get me onto that plane." "Mr. Johnson, I can't allow a non-ticketed individual to board a commercial aircraft. TSA regulations." Diane spoke from behind Robert without looking up from her phone. "Federal civil rights investigation supersedes TSA boarding restrictions under Title 49, Section 46,110, when a minor complainant is involved and the parent or guardian is filing in person. I can have the TSA regional coordinator confirm this in about 4 minutes, or you can save us all the time." Victor stared at Diane. Then he picked up his radio. "Gate 37, this is Marsh. I'm bringing a visitor to the aircraft. Have the jet bridge door opened and ready. Captain Hernandez is expecting him." Robert walked out of the operations office and down the corridor toward Gate 37. The terminal was buzzing now. Word had spread through the airport like a brush fire. Passengers from other flights had gathered near the windows, watching the Gulfstream still sitting on the runway. Airport employees were clustered in small groups whispering, and standing near the gate entrance holding a microphone and talking rapidly to a cameraman was a CNN reporter named Sandra Chen. Sandra saw Robert approaching and broke off her live report mid-sentence. "Mr. Johnson, Sandra Chen, CNN. Can you tell us what's happening? Is it true that your daughter was forcibly removed from first class?" Robert stopped. He looked directly into the camera, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. The voice of a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life without knowing it. "My daughter is 17 years old. She is a student at Columbia University. She had a first-class ticket on Horizon Air. Flight 247. And tonight a flight attendant looked at her, saw a black girl in a hoodie, and decided she didn't belong. They grabbed her. They dragged her out of her seat. They put her in the back of the plane like she was cargo. My daughter called me in tears, and I could hear in her voice something I have spent her entire life trying to protect her from. She sounded like someone who had been taught that she doesn't matter." He paused. The camera was still rolling. Sandra Chen wasn't asking follow-up questions. She didn't need to. I shut down this runway tonight, not because I'm a billionaire throwing my weight around. I shut it down because if I don't, this story disappears by morning. Another black child humiliated. Another apology no one means. Another settlement that changes nothing. Not this time. This time the whole world is going to watch. And this time, something is going to change. He turned and walked through the gate door without waiting for another question. Sandra Chen stood motionless for 3 full seconds before she whispered to her cameraman, "Tell the producers we need to go live. National. Right now." Robert walked down the jet bridge alone. Gerald and Diane waited at the gate. This part was between a father and his daughter, and they both understood that. The aircraft door was open, and James, the young flight attendant who had stayed silent during the incident and had carried that silence like a wound ever since, was standing just inside. He looked at Robert, and his mouth opened, but no words came out. "Where is she?" Robert said. "3A, first class. Right up there, sir." Robert stepped onto the plane. The first-class cabin was silent. The man in 2C had put his newspaper away and was sitting with his hands folded in his lap, staring straight ahead. The woman with the sleep mask had taken it off and was watching the aisle. They both recognized Robert Johnson. Everyone in America with a television would recognize Robert Johnson by morning. Maya was in her seat, still buckled in, still clutching her phone. She had her overhead light on, the one he had told her to turn on so he could see her window from the tarmac. And when she saw her father walking down the aisle of that airplane, she made a sound that came from somewhere deeper than language. "Daddy!" Robert reached her in 3 strides. He knelt beside her seat the same way Captain Hernandez had knelt in economy, and he pulled his daughter into his arms, and Maya buried her face in his shoulder and cried. Not the panicked, broken crying from before. This was release. This was the sound of a girl who had been holding herself together with wire and willpower for the past hour, and who could finally let go, because the one person in the world who made her feel completely safe was here. Robert held her. He didn't speak. He just held her and let her cry and pressed his lips against the top of her head and closed his eyes, and for one moment, just one single moment, he was not a billionaire, or a CEO, or a man who had just shut down an airport. He was a father. That was all. That was everything. The man in 2C wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended he wasn't doing it. The woman across the aisle didn't pretend. She let the tears fall. "I'm sorry, baby girl," Robert whispered. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." "You came," Maya said into his shoulder. "That's all that matters. You came." "I'll always come. You hear me? There is no place on this earth where you could call me, and I wouldn't come." Maya pulled back and looked at him. Her eyes were swollen and red, and there were marks on her arm where Tiffany had gripped her, faint but visible. And when Robert saw those marks, something behind his eyes turned to iron. "Show me," he said quietly. Maya held out her arm. The fingerprints were there, 4 distinct pressure points where an adult hand had squeezed a teenager's arm hard enough to bruise. Robert took a photograph. Then he took another. He sent both to Diane with a single word. "Evidence." Captain Hernandez appeared from the cockpit. He walked up to Robert and extended his hand. "Mr. Johnson, I'm Captain David Hernandez. I owe you and your daughter an apology that I don't have adequate words for." Robert shook his hand. "You're the one who brought her back to her seat." "I should have known what was happening sooner. I was in the cockpit. I didn't know until ground control told me about your jet. But when you found out, you acted. It was the least I could do." Robert studied the captain's face. He had spent 3 decades reading people, and what he saw in David Hernandez was genuine. Exhaustion, shame, anger, and something that looked like resolve. "Captain, what happens to the crew members involved? That's up to the airline, but I've already filed my own incident report, and I've recommended immediate suspension for both Patricia Waverly and Tiffany Miller pending investigation." "And the other one, James?" "James didn't participate. He didn't intervene either, and he'll have to live with that. But he didn't touch your daughter." Robert nodded. "Captain, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Has this happened before?" Captain Hernandez was silent for a long time. Long enough that the answer was obvious before he spoke it. "Not on my flights, but I've heard stories. We all have. Passengers of color being questioned, move challenged in ways that white passengers never are. It's not policy. It's not written down anywhere. It's something that lives in the culture, in the assumptions people carry, and the airline has never done a damn thing about it because nobody with enough power ever forced them to." "Until now," Robert said. "Until now." Robert looked at Maya. "Baby girl, are you okay to fly tonight, or do you want to come home with me on the Gulf Stream?" Maya thought about it. really thought about it. Every instinct told her to run to get off this plane and never set foot on a Horizon Air aircraft again. But something else, something her mother had planted in her years ago, told her to stay. "I want to fly in my seat, Dad. 3A, the seat I paid for. I don't want them to think they ran me off." Robert almost smiled. Almost. "That's your mother talking." "I know." He kissed her forehead and stood up. "I'll be at LAX when you land. I'll be the first face you see when you step off this plane. Promise. I promise." Robert turned to Captain Hernandez. "Captain, I'm trusting you with my daughter for the next 5 hours. I don't do that lightly." "I understand that, sir. She'll be safe. And Captain, one more thing. I'm going to move my jet off the runway now. Not because I'm backing down, because my daughter chose to fly tonight, and I'm not going to stop her from getting where she needs to go. But I want you to know that what happened on this plane is going to have consequences that reach a lot further than this airport." "I'm counting on it, Mr. Johnson." Robert walked back down the aisle. As he passed through economy, passengers watched him go. Some of them had heard the story by now through whispered conversations and text messages. A woman in row 22 reached out and touched his arm as he passed. "Fight for her," she said. Robert looked at her. "I've been fighting for her since the day she was born. I'm not going to stop now." He stepped off the plane and walked back up the jet bridge. Gerald was waiting with his phone pressed to his ear. "The FAA wants the runway cleared in 15 minutes, or they're threatening federal charges. Tell the pilot to move the jet to Teterboro. I'll ride with the attorneys." And the CNN interview is going viral. Sandra Chen's segment has been picked up by every major network. It's the #1 trending story nationally right now. Robert stopped walking. He took out his phone and looked at the screen.